It took me almost 18 years to understand that in my family, affection was measured in bank transfers and favors done at 3 in the morning. What I thought was being the responsible daughter, they called in private the one who doesn't know how to say no. And the day my mom left me a 47-second voicemail telling me I was no longer part of the family, she didn't imagine that with that exact same decision. She was cutting the cable that held up the entire financial structure that for over a decade I had carried on my back without anyone, not even myself, fully noticing. My name is Lauren. I'm 39 years old, a certified public accountant, and I was born in Chicago to a family where I was the only one who finished college. My dad had a mid-sized construction materials distribution business he inherited from my grandfather, and my mom handled the back office with a spiral notebook and an old calculator. When I got into the accounting program at UIC, my dad started talking proudly at family gatherings about how his daughter was going to modernize the business. What nobody told me right then, and what I understood much later, was that this phrase wasn't a shared dream. It was a plan. At 22, fresh out of school, I was already sorting through 5 years of backdated invoices my mom had stuffed into cardboard boxes in the utility room. By 25, I had brought the business right with the IRS for the first time in its history. At 28, when my dad wanted to expand and open a second branch out in Naperville, I was the one who co-signed the bank loan because his credit was already shot from some old late payments, and my mom had never worked on the books. At 32, when my younger brother Aaron decided he wanted to open an auto parts store, I was the one who backed his loan too. At 35, when my sister Madison split up with her husband and had nowhere to go with her 2 kids, I was the one who paid the rent on her apartment for 2 straight years while she got back on her feet. And through all of that, for all those years, I did it with a smile, because in my head, that was being a good daughter, a good sister, a good aunt. It was just what you did. It was what my maternal grandmother, Grandma Ruth, the only person in that house who truly saw me, would tell me when I'd talk to her exhausted on weekends in her kitchen. My girl family is the only thing you really have. What my grandmother didn't know, because nobody told her, was how much it was costing me to be that only thing. I never got married. Not because I didn't want to, but because every time I had a boyfriend and things started getting serious, family emergencies would appear like magic. My dad had a mild heart attack, and they needed me to run the business for 2 months. Aaron wrecked his truck, and they needed cash to get it out of the impound lot. Madison was dealing with depression and couldn't handle the kids. And religiously, I postponed everything until the boyfriends got tired, rightfully so, and walked away. By 37, I stopped trying. I told myself I was fine alone, that my life was complete, just like this. And I almost believed it. The thing that changed everything started on the Saturday in March at my dad's 75th birthday. We had organized a cookout in the backyard of my parents' house in the suburbs. Barbecue, a live band at 5, and about 40 people between aunts, uncles, cousins, and business partners. I had paid for 80% of everything, like always, but nobody talked about that. Those things weren't discussed in my family. They were assumed. Around 4 in the afternoon, when everyone was already a few beers deep, my cousin Jessica, who gets a loose tongue when she drinks, dropped a question in front of the women's table that wasn't really a question. "Hey, Lauren, so when's it your turn? You're getting up there, girl." There was laughter. I smiled, like, always ready to fire back with a joke, when my mom, from the other side of the table, without even looking at me, said out loud, "She's already left on the shelf." Oh, well, not everyone gets lucky, but at least she's good for the numbers. She's good for the numbers. She said that phrase the way someone says a hammer is good for hitting nails. like I was a tool in the garage that just had the decency not to break. And the worst part wasn't what she said. The worst part was that the whole table laughed. My aunts, my cousins, my own sister Madison. And my mom never looked at me, not once. She just kept serving herself potato salad like she'd just commented on the weather. I didn't say anything right then. I learned from a young age that making a scene was the ultimate sin in my family. I got up with the excuse of getting more napkins from the kitchen, and standing right there at the sink with the noise of the band playing in the background, I felt something I had never felt before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was a cold, sharp clarity. Like when a long fever finally breaks and suddenly you can feel your own body again. Like my entire adult life had been viewed through a fogged-up window and someone had just wiped it clean with a rag. That night, when I got back to my apartment downtown in River North, I didn't cry. I pulled a fresh notebook from the drawer and started writing a list. Not a list of grievances, but a list of hard, concrete things. The Naperville branch loan in my dad's name. I'm the cosigner for $2.4 million. Aaron's auto parts store loan. I'm the guarantor for $800,000. Madison's store credit card that I opened in my name because she didn't qualify, carrying a balance of $12,000. 3 vendor contracts for my dad's distribution company that I signed as the legal representative because 5 years ago, he gave me a power of attorney that he never asked for back. The family business bank account where I was a joint signer for security because my mom was afraid of making wire transfers by herself. I made the list until 2 in the morning. There were 14 points. 14 knots tying me to a family that, at a birthday table, had defined me as the one who's good for the numbers. I didn't make any decisions that night. I just closed the notebook and slept like a rock, the way I hadn't slept in years. The following Monday, I went to work like normal. I'm a tax manager at a large accounting firm with offices in Chicago and New York. And I had a meeting with a new client that day. I didn't mention a thing to anyone. Deep down, something was shifting, but I didn't know which way yet. Tuesday night, my mom called me. She hadn't spoken to me since the birthday. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. She asked me to come by the house on Friday because my dad needed me to sign a little something for a refinancing deal with another bank. She said it was all set up, just a formality. I told her Friday was looking complicated, that Saturday would be better. There was a silence on the other end, and then she spoke in a tone I'd known my whole life. Don't start, Lauren. Your father is getting too old for you to start acting high and mighty. We hung up without saying goodbye. Wednesday at 7:30 in the evening, as I was leaving the firm, a voicemail from my mom popped up on my phone. Not from Madison, not from Aaron, not from my dad, from her. I listened to it in my car, still parked in the underground garage. It was 47 seconds. She told me the whole family had talked, including my dad, my siblings, and a couple of uncles who I didn't even know had any business being in that conversation. She said they were all tired of my attitude, that I wasn't the same as before, that I had changed, that I was stuck up because of my job at the firm. She said on Friday my dad was going to sign the refinancing with a different cosigner because my Uncle Ray, my dad's younger brother, had offered to sign. And after that, she preferred if I didn't reach out to anyone, that I shouldn't come to family dinners, shouldn't call, shouldn't show my face, that whenever I came down off my high horse, they'd see if they would welcome me back. And at the very end, right before hanging up, she said a sentence I will never forget. You decide if you want to be part of this family or not, but the way you're acting right now, no. I listened to the message 3 times in a row in the basement of that parking garage. By the 3rd time, my hands had stopped shaking. I went up to my apartment, made myself some tea, and replied with a 2-letter text message. Okay. Nothing else. No exclamation points, no emojis, no explanation. Okay. She never answered that message. I think she expected me to call her crying that same night, or the next day at the latest, begging to talk to my dad, offering to go on Friday, asking for forgiveness for God knows what. That was the script. That had always been the script. But that night, I opened the notebook with the 14-point list and I got to work. By 11 p.m. on Wednesday, I had already sent an email to my lawyer, Attorney Hayes, asking for an urgent meeting first thing Thursday morning. At 11:15, I wrote to my personal accountant, Brenda, asking her to prep a detailed statement of all the cross liabilities I held with my dad's business. At midnight, I logged into the bank's portal and revoked my signature as a joint account holder on the business account. At 1 in the morning, I sent a formal email to the bank holding the Naperville branch loan, requesting information on the procedures to remove myself as a co-signer, given that I was going to be replaced according to my own family, and demanding that any new activity on the loan be flagged to my personal email. At 2 in the morning, I shut my laptop and slept for 4 hours. Thursday at 9 a.m., I was sitting in Attorney Hayes' office. I explained the situation with the dry detachment of someone laying out facts in a courtroom. There were no tears, no drama. I showed him the 14-point list. He listened, took notes, and at the end, he said something that burned itself into my memory. Lauren, I'm going to shoot straight with you. The good news is that almost everything you signed as an individual, for the benefit of third parties. That means you have the right to exit, revoke, and be replaced. The bad news is that your family has absolutely no idea the level of financial exposure they dragged you into. That phrase, the level of financial exposure. It hit me like a bucket of lukewarm water. Lukewarm because I already knew it, but cold because it was the first time someone other than me had said it out loud. We walked out of his office at 11:30 with a 4-step plan. First, pull the power of attorney my dad held in my name through a notarized revocation. Second, formally notify in writing the 3 vendors where I was listed as the legal representative that I was stepping down effective immediately. Third, force the bank to replace the guarantor on the 2 loans within the legal timeframe. Fourth, cancel the department store credit card in my name that Madison was using, offering to pay off the remaining balance myself, but shutting the line down forever. At 12:30, I was at a notary public downtown, signing the revocation of power. At 2 in the afternoon, while eating a sandwich at a deli near the square, I sent the 3 formal emails to the vendors copying Attorney Hayes. At 4, I was at the bank, sitting in a private room with an account executive filling out the paperwork to trigger the guarantor substitution process. The executive asked me, professional but clearly curious, if everything was all right. I smiled at her and said, "Everything is perfectly fine, for the first time in a very long time." By 6 p.m., the retail credit card was canceled. I paid off the $12,000 balance from my personal checking account in one lump sum because I didn't want to owe a single dime to anyone in this story, not even to myself. And at 7 p.m., I turned off my phone, poured myself a glass of red wine in my living room, and stared out at the street from my 11th floor window for an hour without thinking about anything in particular. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindictive. For the first time in my adult life, I felt light. Like someone had just unbuckled a bulletproof vest I'd been wearing since I was 22, without even knowing it. Friday at 10:30 in the morning, when my dad showed up at the bank with Uncle Ray to sign the famous refinancing, he found out several things all at once. First, The bank couldn't move forward with the pending refinance because the original loan had a cosigner, namely me, who had initiated the substitution process, and until that was resolved, the file was frozen. Second, the business account where he planned to park part of the funds no longer had me as a joint signer, which wasn't a problem in itself, but it signaled to him that pieces were moving without him knowing. Third, and he found this out in the afternoon, when the bank manager asked for extra paperwork, the power of attorney I held in his name had been revoked the day before. That meant the last 3 deals I had executed on his behalf earlier this year, specifically 2 massive vendor contracts, now had to be ratified by him directly, in person, with ID, which meant audits and reviews he had spent years delegating to me, just so he wouldn't have to show his face. My dad, as I found out later, stormed out of the bank at 1 p.m. without signing a thing, and called my mom from the parking lot screaming. At least that's what Cousin Jessica, who was at the house that afternoon, told everyone after she heard it all on speakerphone. At 2:40 p.m. on Friday, I turned my phone back on after a major meeting with a new client. I had 23 missed calls, 17 texts, and 9 voicemails. The calls broke down like this: my mom, Madison, my dad, Aaron, Uncle Ray, 2 aunts, and an unknown number that I later realized was the old accountant for the business. I didn't listen to a single voicemail. I didn't read a single text. I called Attorney Hayes and asked him what our next move was. He said, "Nothing on your end, Lauren. If they contact you formally, route them to me. If they contact you emotionally, you decide whether to answer or not. But do not sign. Do not agree. Do not commit to a single thing over the phone. Nothing." At 4 in the afternoon, my mom sent me a text that I did read. It said word for word, "Lauren, your father is doing very badly. His blood pressure spiked. We need you to come to the house today. What you're doing is a betrayal. I can't believe how far you've taken this. Your grandmother is asking for you." That last sentence, "Your grandmother is asking for you." I knew that one. That was the oldest play in the book. Every time my family needed me to cave, they dragged out Grandma Ruth, my maternal grandmother, 87 years old, early stage dementia for the last 3, living in the back bedroom of my parents' house, taken care of by a nurse who, by the way, I had been paying for the last 18 months. But this time, something was different. I loved my grandmother more than anyone in that house, but I was not going to let them use her as a master key to unlock my wallet and my life anymore. I replied to my mom with a single message. "If Grandma wants to see me, tell the nurse to call me directly, and I'll pick her up on Sunday to take her out to lunch. Anything else goes through my lawyer, Mr. Hayes. Here is his number." And I gave her the number. My mom didn't text back. At 7 p.m. on Friday, Madison showed up at the entrance of my building. I saw her through the intercom camera. She was crying with the kids in her car, parked illegally in the loading zone. I didn't buzz her in. I sent her a text. "Madison, I'm not home. If you need something specific, text me. If it's something that requires money or a signature, you take it up with Mr. Hayes." She spent 20 minutes leaning on the buzzer. Then she left. I was inside, sitting in my living room with the TV muted, watching the streetlights bleed through the window. Saturday at 9 in the morning, Aaron, my younger brother, showed up. He leaned on the buzzer until the doorman politely asked him to step away or he was going to call the cops. Aaron yelled from down on the sidewalk, loud enough for a few neighbors to peek out, that I was a bitter, jealous bitch, and that's why I'd ended up alone. I recorded him from my window with my phone. Not for revenge, but because my lawyer had told me to document any harassing behavior. At 4 on Saturday afternoon, Mr. Hayes called me. He told me my dad had reached out to his firm, not to him directly, but to the legal practice where he worked, begging for an emergency mediation. My dad was offering whatever I wanted, as long as I came back as the cosigner for the big loan. Because the bank had informed him that without me, and without a replacement who had my verifiable income, the loan was entering a review period and could be called in completely within the next 45 days. My Uncle Ray, who had offered to sign, didn't qualify. His tax returns didn't show the required income. Aaron didn't either. Madison, obviously not. And my mom, who never held a formal job, wasn't even on the radar. The only name that bank was going to accept on that paper was mine. And I had pulled it. The lawyer asked me what I wanted to do. I told him I was going to think about it over the weekend. He told me one more thing. Lauren, remember that going back is a legal decision, but it's also a personal one. We can fix the legal side in any direction. The personal side, you decide. That Saturday night, I slept terribly. Not out of guilt, but because my brain was replaying my entire adult life at the speed of a carousel. The birthdays where I footed the bill, the Christmases where I did all the cooking, the hospital rooms where I slept in hard plastic chairs, the weddings I went to alone, bringing a gift the size of what I would have brought if I'd shown up with a husband. And right in the middle of that spinning carousel, one single image kept repeating. My mom, sitting at the head of that birthday table, without even looking at me, saying that I was good for the numbers. Sunday at 11 a.m., I called my grandmother's nurse. I asked her to get her ready that I was coming by at 1 to take her to a quiet restaurant for lunch. She said sure, that the older woman was having a good day. I pulled up to my parents' house at 1 on the dot. I didn't get out of the car. I honked twice. The nurse walked out slowly, with my grandmother helping her with her walker. My mom peeked out the front door. Our eyes locked for the first time since the birthday. We didn't wave. I took my grandmother to a really good old-school diner out by the lake. We had pot roast, her favorite. I didn't talk much. I just held her hand a lot. At one point, between the entree and dessert, she looked at me with those eyes that were sometimes there and sometimes gone, and she said, "My girl, you are always the good one. Too good. That's not always a good thing." And then she chuckled, the way old women do, and kept eating. I don't know if she said it out of clarity or confusion. At that point, it didn't matter. My grandmother had just given me, without knowing it, the permission I had been waiting years for, without even knowing I was waiting for it. I dropped her back off at 4. I gave her a long kiss on the forehead. The nurse took her inside. My mom didn't come out. That night, I texted Mr. Hayes a short message. I'm not going back on the loan. We proceed with the substitution to the bitter end. If the bank calls it in, let them call it in. It's not my debt. Monday morning kicked off the next phase, which dragged on for 3 months. My dad had to renegotiate with the bank under brutal new terms, because the only way to keep the Naperville branch from going under was to put the main warehouse up as collateral, something he had spent years avoiding. He did it. He signed, putting the family home and the warehouse on the line. Aaron had to eat the auto parts store loan all by himself, because I pulled my backing there too, the second the legal window allowed it. And since his income wasn't enough, the bank jacked up his interest rate and slashed his repayment term. Madison, without the credit card, actually had to talk to her ex-husband to restructure the child support, something she hadn't wanted to do for years out of pure pride, but which ended up working out better for her than she expected. For those 3 months, I didn't speak to anyone in my immediate family, except my grandmother. Once a week, on Sundays, out for lunch. The nurse handed her off to me outside, and I handed her back outside. My mom never showed her face again. A month and a half into all of this, I got a certified letter at my apartment. It was from my dad. 4 handwritten pages in the shaky scrawl of a 70-year-old man. He told me he'd been wrong about me, that I had always been the best daughter a father could ask for, that my mom had blown things out of proportion, that the family missed me, that my grandmother asked about me every single day, and that he was willing to do whatever it took to get me to come back. I cried reading that letter. I won't lie. I sat on my floor with the letter in my hands and cried for an hour. But in the end, I didn't reply. Not because I didn't forgive him, but because I realized something important. Forgiveness is one thing. Going back to being a tool in the garage is something else entirely. I could forgive without going back. In fact, it was the only real forgiveness possible, the kind that didn't cost me more than it cost them. I did send him a brief response via certified mail, also handwritten, telling him that I loved him, that I would always love him, that I understood his letter, but that I was never going to share financial responsibilities with any member of the family ever again. Not now, not ever. And that if they wanted to see me, I was open to neutral family lunches at a restaurant. No money talk, no favors, no little things to sign. Once a month if they wanted. They didn't answer that proposal for 6 weeks. Then my dad replied, just him, saying he accepted. We had our first lunch, just the two of us, at a steakhouse downtown in August. We talked about the weather, the house my grandmother football. We didn't talk about the business. We didn't talk about my mom. It was weird, but it was real. For the first time in a long time. My mom has never spoken to me directly again. Madison and I say hello at the kids' birthdays twice a year, with the kind of forced politeness you use at the office. Aaron pretended I didn't exist for a long time, until at a cousin's wedding, already drunk, he stumbled over to tell me that he finally got it, and he was sorry. I thanked him, told him we were good, and didn't offer to sign a damn thing for the rest of my life. Grandma Ruth passed away in February of last year. I got the news via text. I went to the wake. My mom was there, dressed in black, her eyes red. I sat in the very back row. I prayed a full rosary for my grandmother, the only person in that family who had told me, back when she could still say things clearly, that I was a good person. I left before the burial. It wasn't out of spite. It was because I no longer needed to stick around to prove anything. Today, I'm 41. I still live in the same apartment which I paid off completely last year. I bought a small house in an older neighborhood out in the suburbs, with a backyard where I plan to retire someday, not too far away. I have a dog named Tommy, 2 close friends I travel with once a year, and a new title at the firm as a junior partner. I don't have a partner right now, but I'm not ruling it out. Last year, I dated a divorced architect for 4 months, and even though it didn't work out for reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with my family, I realized something beautiful. For the first time in my life, when he asked me about myself, I actually had my own things to talk about. Not favors done for other people, not someone else's debts. My own things. Sometimes, late at night, the memory of that 47-second voicemail still hits me. I saved it. I didn't delete it. Not out of bitterness. I kept it as a reminder that the cruelest thing ever said to me was also the exact thing that handed me my freedom. My mom thought she was kicking me out of something. In reality, she was giving me back to myself. And if anyone listening to me today recognizes themselves in some piece of this story, the only thing I want to tell you is this. Family isn't where they tell you that you belong in exchange for something. Family is where they let you exist without having to sign anything, without having to prove anything, without having to be good for anything. And if the one you have isn't like that, you are not obligated to stay just because you share a last name and blood. There is an after. I am the proof, and the living is good. You live finally in peace. There comes a moment when putting down the weight of other people isn't abandonment. It's the most honest act of self-love that exists. Lauren didn't take revenge. She didn't scream. She didn't demand apologies. She just quietly walked away, like someone who finally closes a door that should have been shut a long time ago. And on the other side of that door, she found something nobody had ever given her. Her own life, waiting for her patiently. A quick note for those hanging out with us today. This story was built and narrated by artificial intelligence, meant to entertain you and hopefully leave you with something valuable to take with you today.